So we're going to talk now a little bit about discipline, and then we're going to talk about anxiety and stress and school-age kids. So school-age kids now have the ability to reason. So some discipline can be carried out by reasoning with the child. If parents are asking about discipline, or when we're giving anticipatory guidance, we can encourage them to give the child the reason for their instructions. Parents can also be encouraged to use natural and logical consequences. Natural consequences are what naturally happens as a result of the decision. Logical consequences are used when the natural consequence is not acceptable or is going to be too far away, and there's some consequence imposed by the authority that is related to the action. So an example of natural consequences, if today it's going to be in the 40s, and if a child insists on wearing shorts, they're going to be outside not a whole lot today, and they're going to get cold. Most healthy kids are not going to become hypothermic in the time that they go from the vehicle to the school, or from the school across to lunch. If they have to stay outside for an hour or so, they might, but not likely if they're moving around. So the natural consequence, rather than arguing or forcing the child to wear warmer clothing, would be to allow them to experience cold, and then they'll make decisions in the future based on that. A logical consequence, if it's 20 degrees and the child is insisting on wearing shorts and they're going to have to be outside for an hour during the day, the natural consequence of that would be potentially harmful, like actual damage. And so the parent would have a more logical consequence for that, that if they refuse to wear pants, they can't go outside because it's too dangerous. And so that consequence is still connected to the action, but it's imposed by the authority. Sometimes parents might also withhold privileges or require compensation. If a child damages something or does something hurtful to another, they might require some form of compensation. If you broke your sister's doll, you have to wow, I just did that, didn't I? If you broke your sister's toy or your brother's toy, whatever, whoever's doll it was, or house or whatever, you broke that, you've got to go and earn the money in some way to replace that. Okay. Physical discipline is controversial. It has not been shown to be effective in the long term. As kids get older, it may be less effective in the short term. As a nurse, it's not our job to tell people how to parent. We may be giving suggestions at times, but we need to understand the difference between discipline and abuse. And there is discipline that may not be the way I do it, and there's abuse, and those are separate things. Okay. Under state laws currently, physical discipline is not necessarily considered abuse. Hitting with the closed fist, hitting in the face, things like that might be. Lying, stealing, and cheating are very common behaviors in the early school years, especially, and those are things that are related to their social and their intellectual development. Early school age kids actually have a hard time distinguishing between reality and what they want to be true. So, did you clean your room? The kid really, really, really wants to please, and so they might say yes. But is that really accurate? Not necessarily. Kids may also lie because they don't want to disappoint the adults. Kids may lie to get what they want without consequences. So there are different reasons that kids might lie. Recommendation is not giving them the opportunity to lie. Don't ask if you know the answer. Don't try to set them up to lie. Cheating and lying should be addressed, but be aware that it's common, normal behavior. But it's behavior that needs to be addressed so that it doesn't continue as they get older. Cheating at games is very common in the early school years because kids have a hard time coping with losing. Stealing is also common in the early school years. Kids don't have great impulse control, and their sense of ownership is only developing. So they see something in someone else's desk that they really, really want. They may have a hard time not taking that. Or they go in the store and they really want that candy or that nail polish. They may take it out with them because they really want it. Some recommendations for that. Adults should respect children's personal property, because if we model disrespect for their personal property, then they may disrespect other people's property. For stealing, if we have the child return the item or pay for it, that can be an effective logical consequence. And again, some of this is getting into parenting, but we're talking about behaviors that are common based on developmental characteristics. One of the most important things to understand is that these are normal behaviors. They're not acceptable behaviors, but they're normal behaviors for the development of this child. And so if a child is lying or stealing in first, second grade, rather than labeling that child, oh, this child is a liar and a thief, those are developmental misbehaviors that can be addressed without labeling the child. Now, kids with anxiety, stress, and fear. So a lot of school-age kids right now have high anxiety, okay, and high stress. Adults frequently think of childhood, or we want to think of childhood as this idyllic time when we didn't have any worries. But the reality is a lot of kids do have worries, and they may have typical, the sitcom kid worries, like, oh, I've got homework I need to do, but I want to go play. Which one do I do? Or my friend is mad at me and I didn't do anything wrong. How do I fix that? And those are kind of sitcom, and those are very real to that child at the time. But there are a lot of kids also who are dealing with real stressors. I don't want to say real stressors. Typical childhood concerns are also real stressors, but there are kids who are dealing with adult stressors like poverty, not having supportive adults in their families, not having someone who is on their side or is making sure they have their needs met. A child that's having to make sure their own needs get met. Unrealistic expectations about their performance in school, in sports, just their behavior. Environmental stresses. Right now, our environmental stressors as the entire world has had additional environmental stressors over the past 2 years because COVID. There's a deadly disease that's been out in the last 2 years, and people have had family losses. They've had changes in the way their world is structured and the rules of operating within that world, all because of this disease process. Well, that's affected adults, but it's also affected children. Right now, a lot of children have had about 2 years of disrupted education because of COVID. And that's a stressor. Kids are being told, they're being pressured about, you need to pass this test. If you don't pass this test, you don't move to the next grade. If you don't pass this test, you're going to be behind forever and you're not going to go to college and have a good job. All of those stresses are very real for kids. And that's on top of other stresses that were already there in both our society and then potentially in family. So think about society level, family level, individual level. Another stressor in our society is early sexualization of kids. There's a lot of encouragement for kids to behave in ways that adults think are cute, but are actually really based on adult sexual relationships. So you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, those kind of things. Some of the physiologic effects of stress. Stress causes tight muscles. It may cause kids to be jittery, tachycardic, They may have trouble breathing. They may have headaches, abdominal pain, and other vague pain or neurologic symptoms. Kids often don't recognize anxiety. They may feel it as physical symptoms. I've got a stomach ache. I don't feel like going to school today. They may not be able to connect that to when they're at school, they're experiencing a lot of stress. How can we help kids learn to manage stress? We can teach relaxation exercises. We can give them opportunities to blow off steam, like through physical activity or some other activities. We can give them opportunities to talk about their stress. Some typical school age fears. And again, we often would prefer to think of kids as, oh, this happy-go-lucky, don't have to think about anything, but they do. They think about what might go wrong. So some common fears are fear of the dark, worry about behavior, getting in trouble, or being a good person. They worry about being a victim of violence. They worry about death, either their own or the death of people they care about. And they worry about social isolation. They're afraid of being alone. Okay, we have one more section. We're going to talk about anticipatory guidance for school age kids.